When we talked about postmodernism, we have focused on its theoretical claims, its attack on foundations, and its attack on the unity of truth. But postmodernism has also been associated with a set of more practical aims and policies, having to do with diversity. The link between postmodernism and diversity is easy to see. The postmodernist claims that there are multiple truths, each of them available from a different perspective. She also claims that there is no overarching neutral truth. So postmodernism is intrinsically hostile to any claim that one cultural group or another has the right view, and that others should either accept this view or remain quiet. Instead, postmodernism suggests that there are many correct views and that we get the fullest understanding of the world if we cultivate all of those views and the perspectives from which they come. So, it should be no surprise that thinkers interested in the social position of women, of gays and lesbians, of ethnic minorities, and so on, have been drawn towards the theoretical ideas of postmodernism. Many of these thinkers contend that our current society is one in which there certainly are multiple perspectives, but in which those perspectives have not been treated equally. Rather, there has been one dominant perspective, the perspective generally of white-skinned, straight, European or North American males, and other perspectives have been repressed, sometimes forcefully, sometimes peacefully, sometimes consciously, but also often unconsciously. This situation is, quite naturally, thought to be unjust. It is thus that the often very abstract ideas of postmodernism are supposed to help in the struggle against injustice. In this lecture, I want to give a sketch of the issues and problems that surround the notions of diversity and identity, issues and problems that anyone who wishes to do justice to the existence of different groups and perspectives in society will have to deal with. We will learn that although postmodernism certainly has something to contribute to these debates, its contribution is quite a bit more complex and subtle than people have often assumed. So, let us start by describing some traditional positions. And since it is probably the most traditional position of them all, let us start with the idea that there is one group in society which is best suited to finding out the truth about the world. For most of European history, and indeed much of history all over the world, the idea was generally held that men, and to be more specific, well-born, well-educated, rich men, were the only ones whose ideas about the world were truly worth taking seriously. Women, lower-class people, people from religious or ethnic minorities were rarely put in the circumstances where they could develop and publish their ideas. And if they did, these ideas would rarely be taken seriously. So here we have the traditional society in which one group is supposed to have the best access to the truth, and others just have to accept the truth from them. Now, that is obviously a very black and white picture, since throughout history people have been challenging this idea. For instance, there is a famous passage in Plato's dialogue The Republic where he claims that men and women have the same capacities and should receive the same education, although he does add that men are better at everything. Or we have Christine de Pisan's The Book of the City of Ladies, written around 1400, in which Christine, after complaining to God that she has been created a woman and is therefore weak and stupid, is visited by a woman called Reason, who explains to her that women are just as smart as men and gives her many examples of courageous and smart women in history. Anyway, against this traditional view of one privileged group, there arose another, by now also traditional view, which I will call Universalism. Universalism is the idea that all people are equal, or at least that all groups are equal, that men are not more or less intelligent than women, that Europeans are neither more nor less scientific than Asians, and so on. And that this equality means that when you do science, it just doesn't matter who you are. There is no difference between science done by a man and science done by a woman. All these distinctions, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and so on, are perfectly irrelevant when it comes to finding out the truth about the world around us. Universalism is in many ways a noble ideal. But many people, especially those who have thought most deeply about the status of minorities and oppressed groups, have come to the conclusion that universalism is fatally flawed. It is flawed precisely because it assumes that the differences between people make no difference, that everybody is really the same. It suppresses people's own identity and forces them to become just like everybody else. But in practice, of course, that just means becoming like the dominant group. We can see that happening in society all the time. Women can run large companies if they act and even dress as much like men as possible. Muslims are welcome in Europe as long as nobody can see that they're Muslims and they never talk about their religion. I'm exaggerating a little maybe, but you can see what I'm getting at. And of course, this is highly problematic. If you are not accepted with your own identity, then you are not really accepted at all. So in practice, universalism often leads to a kind of hidden repression. On a more theoretical level, universalism implies that there is a neutral perspective on truth, something that everybody should be able to agree on. But of course, we have seen that postmodernism rejects this idea of a neutral perspective. To take a straightforward example, a history of the Yugoslavian wars written by a Dutch historian will look very different from one written by a Serbian historian, even if both are serious scholars with an earnest desire to tell the truth. And there is no way to write a neutral history, the postmodernist would add. So the main theoretical presupposition of universalism seems to be false. But what is the alternative? Well, we could, and this too is something that we can see happening around us a lot, do the opposite of universalism. We could stress the differences between groups and celebrate the different perspectives that they bring. So we could say things like, we need more women in science in order to get the insights of the female perspective. But of course that too is highly problematic. Not so much the appeal to get more women in science, but the idea that a woman in science is someone who speaks for or from the female perspective. That a woman is someone who gives us feminine truths or something like that. Why is that problematic? Well, first of all, it makes the same strict binary divisions between people that sexist theories also make. To a certain extent, it is a sexist theory. Second, by reducing a particular woman to being a member of the group of women, someone who speaks for women or as a woman, we are closing our eyes to the great diversity among women and to the fact that it is always an individual and never a group that we are talking to. The last thing we want is a scientific conference where a speaker is introduced with something like, And now we will hear the female perspective on morphological variation in Slavic languages. Or our next speaker will show us the African truth about Impressionist painting. We don't want to go there. So what we have uncovered is quite paradoxical. If we claim with universalism that differences between groups should be ignored, we can't do justice to the different perspectives of actual people. But if we claim, on the other hand, that differences between groups are very important and that we need the perspectives of all groups in science and in other parts of society, we also can't do justice to people's perspectives. Using the terminology of Hegel, we could say that what we have here are a thesis and an antithesis which are screaming for a synthesis. Finding that synthesis is, I believe, one of the most important tasks of postmodernism, and a task, furthermore, which is not yet fully accomplished. But we can see the beginning of an answer in the postmodernists' rejection of clear and stable essences. An essence is what is essential to something, what really makes something what it is. One could, for instance, claim that the essence of masculinity is competition, that only a competitive man is a real man, and that the essence of femininity is being caring, that only a sweet and caring woman is a real woman. Now, the two strategies of universalism and of emphasizing identities both presuppose the existence of stable essences. It's just that the universalist believes that they are irrelevant for science, while the person who stresses group identities thinks that they are both relevant and valuable. But if we think back to Derrida and his ideas on interpretation, we can immediately understand that a postmodernist can't believe in essences that are either stable or clear. A concept like woman, or man, or Christian, or Muslim, or whatever, is not a concept that is completely clear to us and that always remains the same, because no concept is completely clear and always remains the same. On the contrary, concepts always need interpretation, and there are always multiple interpretations possible. This is especially true of terms like woman, which are incredibly complex and full of explicit and implicit meaning. And what's more, every woman will come to a slightly or even radically different conclusion about what her female identity means to her, or even that it doesn't mean anything to her. So there really can be no female perspective, the postmodernist would say, because the meaning of woman is ambiguous and always changing, and the chosen interpretation will differ from person to person. But it is also false to say that there is no female perspective, because the term woman does have a different cultural meaning than the term man, for instance. And women and men therefore will almost certainly come to different self-interpretations and different perspectives of the world. The postmodern synthesis between universalism and group identity, then, will probably be based around an idea like self-interpretation. Each of us is part of a cultural fabric that we cannot escape from, and that determines who we are. It means something that I am a white Dutch straight male from an upper middle class family. But exactly what it means is not set in stone. Within certain confines, many self-interpretations are possible. And by living according to those interpretations, I am continually changing, in small and subtle ways, the meaning of the terms themselves. So, an identity is not just something that we have. We do have it, but we also construct it. And what postmodernists generally seek to do is to open up spaces in which identities can be constructed as well as lived.